doing the podcast. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. Got to
Yeah,
start with
great.
that. Like, I'm grateful. Thank you.
Happy to be
Um,
here.
yeah, the underlying reason for this is largely to get more conversations out in the world for people to hear, uh, and really to talk about it because, and this is completely selfishly scratching my own itch. That when I started leading software teams, I wanted more stories available in the world that where I could say, oh, that makes sense. How do I relate that to what I'm doing? Right. And I never found it. And so this is me building it now for the next generation because I think people learn a lot through stories. So that's why I'm asking you to do this. Um, I think I told you before, I don't really have a script. I only have one question that I ask everyone,
Sure.
and then it's organic from there. And that one question is, how did you get started doing leadership at all?
Wow, that's a really good question.
Thank you.
Um, First off, I kind of came to IT by accident.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a naturally curious kid, very intellectually curious. Um, some might even say geeky today in today's parlance. Um, I was equally content as a young child to sit and read the World Book
Mm-hmm.
and go page by page and just absorb it as I was to go outside and play baseball or hockey with my mates. So I was always intellectually curious and, went through school and I was getting into university and didn't really know what I wanted to do, but everybody was like, you got to be a doctor, a dentist, a lawyer, chief of the local Indian tribe, something. And so, I went to school and I got a bachelor of science, and then it was like grad school, and now it's like, okay, so what do I do? So I literally just casted the widest net one can imagine. I applied to law school and dental school and
Oh
graduate
wow.
school and medical school and got into law school, ended up on a wait list for medical school, got into graduate school, and I decided to pursue an advanced degree in pharmacology, psychopharmacology,
Mm-hmm.
and did that, and then went into the doctorate program, and realized along the way that I really hated being in a lab. I initially it was interesting, and then it got very dry and very boring. You were doing the same thing over and over and over again, very repetitive. And I'm like, geez, I really got to find something to do with my life here. And so I finished up with school, and along the way, I was very fortunate. They really invested in graduate students to develop computer programming skills. So everybody had, the rudiments of programming, and everybody was able to. Oops, am I still there, or I just went dark?
Oh, you just went dark. Your camera just went dark.
Okay, let me just see if I can get it back. Hang on one sec here. Uh, oh, I'm back. Okay. Sorry about that. I don't know
It's
what
okay.
happened. Just went crazy. Long story short is
You're still not. I'm still. I'm not. Oh, there you go. Okay. There was a
yeah,
time delay. Yeah.
yeah, so flash forward, um I needed something to do and I had some programming skills. So I got a job working for a commercial company that happened to need somebody to help them computerize their operations. They'd been in business for 40 odd years, very established company. And so my first job was basically implementing a computer system which I had never done before. And, you know, I had to learn the business. I had to learn the business processes. I had to learn, you know, what the flow was and how they bought goods and how they held goods and how they sold and delivered goods and, you know, just how much did they need and lead times and serial numbers and products, and learned a tremendous amount about the company and the doing.
Hmm.
And when it was all said and done, it was a pretty good implementation. And I said, geez, you know, I think I really like this. I think I want to do it over and over again. And so I took that knowledge and I got myself a job working for a company that sold computer systems for the retail trade, mostly in the fashion industry. And
Hmm.
of course, I knew nothing about fashion, right? I mean, I knew you know, you bought clothes and, you know, but I didn't know what fashion was, and I certainly didn't know about seasonality, and I didn't know about assortments, and I didn't know about coordinate groups and all that, you know, stuff. And but I got this job and they trained me and I, you know, learned about, you know, replenishment and demand planning and forecasting and, you know, inventory management and purchasing and EDI, and the knowledge base just grew exponentially in that particular role. And
Right, right.
I kind of moved up the food chain, and you know, the question about leadership, tying it back in. So I became a project manager, and the project manager was basically the quarterback, right? So
Yep, yep.
I had the, you know, relationship with the client. I was directly responsible for, you know, delivering what their expected outcomes were. And I was managing the team. So the team was, you know, business analysts and developers and technical leads and support people because we were selling hardware. So, you know, we had to
Mm,
get the hardware installed and we had to make sure that it was all working. We were selling software and, you know, we're basically selling integration services, getting the software and the hardware to come together and work. And everything was, you know, delivered on site. There was no cloud in those days. You
sure.
know, bought a server. So you bought an IBM server or a Data General server or whatever. And I remember, you know, software installation was a hoot because you had these giant cassettes and you'd pop this cassette in and it would download all the programs and you know and you'd boot the system up and you know you'd initialize everything and so I learned how to do all of that stuff, and at the same time I was kind of the business process engineer. So I was the
Ah.
guy that would sit with the business and say, okay, how do you order merchandise? And what do your
Mhm.
orders look like? And how many orders do you cut? And, you know, how many line items do you have on an order? And how many units do you, you know, buy at a time? And how are they put in a box? That was really interesting because, you know, like there were times where you'd have a client that they'd say, well, we need the ability to plan our shipments so that the boxes contained the sizes in the proportion that we needed them to be in so that we could cross stock the merchandise and ship that same box from China right to Macy's without having to open it, count it, and repack it. So you learn all this crazy stuff, and I was managing all of these other people who were on the team, and did that for a few years. And I was up in Canada at that time, and while I was on a business trip, I met a gal, and we decided to pursue a relationship. And I moved to the States, and I took a job working for Coopers and Lybrand in their
Oh yeah.
retail practice. And you know, the retail practice was it was a very Cooper's was a very white shoe firm. It was very different from like, you know, um, Anderson, which became Accenture, or Deloitte, or even Price Waterhouse. We were very white shoe. and very conservative. And it was a very formal environment. So, I you know would wear jeans to work in the old company, and now I'm in a suit and a tie, and I'm going to work in a big office building on, Sixth Avenue in Manhattan, and I'm going to client sites and, living the high life, staying in fancy hotels and, flying all over the country, and so I, became a manager and, naturally managed, teams of consultants on site. And that was a really important development experience in my career because unlike a lot of jobs that people take where you've got a role in an organization with very defined deliverables and responsibilities and outcomes, to being in this role where literally 5 times a year you're parachuted behind enemy lines and you have to absorb a tremendous amount of material in a very compressed timeline, and you have to show how you can, take all these new pieces of data and put them all together and come up with the right solution to the client's problem. And since they're paying a lot of money and time is money, the expectation is you're going to work very quickly, right? So, like Y2K was a great example. Nobody knew how to do Y2K testing before Y2K.
Right,
You think
right,
about it, it was like you couldn't go to school for it. Like nobody was going to teach you,
right,
what to look for. Nobody was going to tell you, what pieces and parts of a system were vulnerable to, date ranges. So you literally had to sit there and say, well, what would happen if I cut a PO today and I received it after 2000? Or what would happen, if I received inventory today, but I went to sell it in 2000? And all these what if scenarios, which eventually became test scripts, right?
right,
So
right,
you would test all of this stuff, and then you'd rewind the system back to 1999, and you'd run more tests and, roll it forward into 2000. And sure enough, we found all kinds of issues and bugs and, things where numbers were getting corrupted or calculations didn't work anymore after you crossed
right,
the date
right,
threshold. But that was a very good example of, what you learned in consulting that you typically wouldn't have learned in any other role, right?
right, right.
And it was just like that. Like, for example, we were parachuted into, fine, I guess I can say it, TJ Maxx, right?
Mhm.
And TJ Maxx was, basically a mainframe shop, and they wanted to modernize, and they needed a 5-year IT plan. So we did this strategic information systems plan, and we called them a SISP, SISP. I think I still have a book here somewhere. And it was really interesting. Like, we basically had to decompose the business and really understand what was the essence of the business and where were they constrained by their systems and their processes, and where could they make money or operate more efficiently or faster or better if we kind of took those constraints away.
Right,
And then it got into, okay, well, those are the systems you need and the processes you'd like to be able to, morph to. Now, what does that mean in terms of what technologies you're going to buy, and what people do you need to hire, and what skills do you need to have, and what budget do you need to, allocate, and how much time do you think that transformation will take, and how do you manage it? It was really fascinating in the doing to really see what a transformation looked like from the planning perspective. Because most people, they live a transformation, right? They work for a company, they're in a role. The company says, okay, everybody, let's line up in the starting line and we're going to transform now. And you're going to go here and you're going to go there and you're going to do this and you're going to do that. This was the reverse or the inverse of, okay, how do you put that all together? Right?
Right.
What does day one or day zero look like? And where do people need to be lined up? And what needs to happen first, second, third, and how do the parts and pieces fit together? So it was really intriguing. And leading a team in that kind of environment, I think was really great. And from then on, I mean, my career just kind of, you know, wound its way through out in Silicon Valley and doing product marketing and product management for a startup, and and then leading the development organization for another startup, and then leaving the startup world because it startups are for the people that are serial entrepreneurs or people that like to do one startup after another.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
have my undying admiration. It is a really difficult environment to operate in. You know, um, what's my product going to be, and how do I build it, and how do I sell it, and how do I convince somebody that if they take a chance on me, they're not going to be disappointed, and then how do I deliver it, and how do I support the next generation and the next generation, and I mean, the startup experience it is truly a lived experience. If you've never done a startup, you
Hmm.
have no idea how many hats you will end up wearing in one
Yes.
company at one
Yes.
time. I mean, you will be the accountant, the business process engineer, you'll be coding at night, you'll be testing at 3 o'clock in the morning. You'll be running to the client site and installing the software and hoping to hell that what you saw the night before is actually going to work on site the next morning. And then you hope in hell you're going to get paid. It was really a tremendous, and the highs and the lows, right? Um, I remember like when you get funding, right? You get it,
Hmm.
you close a round of funding and you get like a whole bunch of money, and you're drunk. It's like you're so giddy. It's so exciting. You've got all of this money, and it's not just the money, it's the possibility that comes with the money, right? Now we can build something. Now we can market something. Now we can make something happen. And you flash forward 12 months or 14 months and the money gets spent. And you maybe have two customers and the product isn't growing and the market isn't accepting the product, and it's like, what happens next? And you're back out, looking for more money and going through the cycle again and again. It takes a certain fortitude to live that role. And I discovered after doing it a couple of times, not for me. The highs and the lows were too high and too low, and and sitting there and saying, okay, money's tight. Now I got to fire a bunch of people, and we have to fight another day, and the heartbreak of letting people go who had done great work, and all the hats that you have to wear, and the frustrations that you have. It takes a certain kind of person to do it over and over and over again. I definitely think everybody should do at least one,
Hmm.
because
Yep.
if you haven't done a startup, you really don't know how you can be stretched as a person and how you can grow, because
Right.
it is
Right.
the most challenging environment one can imagine. And I think it's well worth the doing. And like I said, to be able to do it over and over and over again, like hats off to the people that, have that, chemistry. My molecules don't align with that kind of lifestyle. So after the startup world, I kind of said, yeah, did that, been there. I think I'm going to go back to trade. And so I went back to industry, and um, it really was a series of jobs that all pretty much looked the same. I would be, VP of applications. I'd be responsible for the day-to-day operations of the business. one company sold dresses, one company sold vitamins, one company sold handbags, another company, did something else. The products changed, but the essence of the role basically remained the same. And
Right.
some of the companies were vertically integrated, so you needed to know the manufacturing and the wholesale and retail parts of the business. Some companies just bought product that was made by somebody else and they just sold it. So you needed to just really know the retail and the marketing pieces. But the role was pretty much the same role over and over again. And, I did that for, a number of years. And then the pivot, um, and I think, going back to leadership, the pivot was really interesting in that I had an opportunity to do enterprise architecture. And, enterprise architecture is a really intriguing discipline. Um, and it's become like a hot discipline now. Like once upon a time, people didn't know what enterprise architects were and they didn't know they needed them. And now, they're kind of a sought after discipline. And once again, I discovered, there was so much room to grow in a role. And, when I went from, being VP of IT or VP of applications or, VP of enterprise applications to an enterprise architect, it was so different because all of a sudden, rather than just kind of running the business, you had to really understand how the business worked and how IT supported it and how IT could make it better. And so now you're sitting in a room and you're listening to the business strategy presentation,
Mm-hmm.
and they're talking about, okay, over the next 5 years, we want to, move into skincare where traditionally we did, makeup. And what does that mean? And take that and say, okay, now what kind of systems are we going to need and what kind of technologies are we going to need to be in the skincare business? And, how do we, instantiate that? And so it was really this synthesis of understanding the business strategy and the business direction and how IT and process, could rise to the challenge. And it was fascinating because I was at a company that basically gave me opportunity to look at every single possible facet of business. I was in the makeup business working for Estee Lauder.
Mm-hmm.
And, there was regulatory compliance. There was manufacturing process, there was quality control, there was supply chain and logistics, there was demand planning, there was forecasting, there was finance. We had a portfolio of 1,400 applications.
Wow.
And every single application was written in a different programming language and had a different underlying database. I mean, we had everything. I mean, you couldn't come up with a database technology that we didn't have. And we
Wow.
from mainframe, all the way to, vector and, graph databases. I mean, we had it all. And rationalizing that portfolio. I mean, the first job I had was somebody said, we really should have a business capability map. And I knew what it was, but I didn't know how to make one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's no classes that you can take on how do you create a business capability map. I mean, you can find examples of them, but nobody's going to teach you how to do it. And
Right.
so, I had to kind of teach myself. Um, and then we got into, I was the holder of the um, portfolio. And, and then it was, okay, well, we got to find ways to save money. And it would be like, well, we have 38 different CRM systems.
Wow.
And and like, how do you rationalize that? And for years they talked about um, building one massive CRM system, which wasn't even feasible because of data domain sovereignty laws. Like Japan data can't leave Japan. China data for sure can't leave China. Russia data has to stay in Russia. And so the notion of having a database that ran, in Virginia that had, everybody's information from all over the world was just a non-starter, one. Two, that kind of scale didn't didn't really work because you had such a mishmash of markets and consumer types and purchase behavior and product types and brands, and trying to cram it all in a single view was was brutal. I mean, really brutal. So we came up with the notion of we'll build our own consumer data platform. And well, how do you build a CDP? Nobody ever done one before. I mean, like there were examples of them. There were companies that were trying to sell you them, but like to build a CDP from scratch meant that you had to design it.
Right. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and and you had to really understand all of the business capabilities that it had to deliver, and who were your customers, and you very quickly you realized, well, I don't have one customer, I got a bunch of customers. I have people in the marketing world, I have people in the sales world. They want to understand directionally what product categories are moving in what markets. You had, customers in the financial world that wanted to know, how many customers are repeat, and, are repeat customers, more valuable per se than say the one and dones. And so you had to design for all of these constituencies. And I was it. I was the architect, and I designed this CDP, and we started building it. And I remember that the first place we were going to build it was China. And oh my God, that was brutal. It was tough. It was, first of all, what do you learn about leadership? Um, so I'm from New York. I am obviously not Chinese. And my customers are a half a world away, and they're looking at me suspiciously. Well, what do you really know about China? And you had to really kind of bridge the divide of, it's not just a technical design, but it's really understanding your customer, your market, your culture, enabling your business. And we got run through the ringer. Like, we were halfway into the build, and somebody said, well, why are you building it in Microsoft Azure? This is China. You should be building it in Alley Cloud. And we're like, okay, well, we had designed it for, open source. And so we said, okay, we'll sit down with the Alley Cloud people and see how they can enable us. Shouldn't be a problem. Bill, I'm here to tell you it was some of the funniest moments of my career.
Yeah.
You would be on the phone at 11 o'clock at night or midnight talking to people in China, and we'd be on with the Alley Cloud guys, and you'd ask them a question. And of course, there was like one guy who spoke English, right? And he would translate in Chinese, in Mandarin, and you'd ask, can you do blah blah blah, and he would talk to them, and for like 15 minutes they would have this discussion in Mandarin, and then he'd come back and he'd say no. And okay, well, just a second. It took me about 38 seconds to ask you, can you do blah, blah, blah? And you just discussed it for 15 minutes. And the answer after eight guys talking for 15 minutes was no. And it very quickly became apparent that, you know, Ali Cloud just wasn't there where we needed them to be because we wanted to move very high up the stack and use PaaS services and not just VMs. And they were basically just selling VMs.
Mm,
In large part, they had essentially copied AWS.
right, right, of course.
And, architecturally, it looked like AWS, but, a couple of generations behind.
Right,
So, and what we wanted to do really was we wanted past databases and we'd want to, have past Kubernetes and, we'd want to have all these kind of leading edge turnkey services and they just were not there. So, but we had to do all that conversation and discovery and then go back to the people in China and say, look, we gave it the go here, but they're not ready for us. And very grudgingly, they said, okay, you can continue building it in Azure. But, even that was a learning experience because there was the technical aspects of it, and then there was the relationship aspects of it,
right, right,
and the cultural aspects. And you really had to be diplomatic about, getting those folks on your side and understanding, that you really were acting in their best interests and not just, from the lens of the Western guy coming to China and, trying to cram something down their
right,
throat.
right.
So that was a really good set of learnings. And um China is really interesting also to do business in because China's speed. So, everything happens very fast in China, except it really doesn't. It's like it takes a long time for people to agree on something. And then
Mm,
and then the execution piece is fast, but the discussion piece is very long. Whereas here I find in the Western world, we tend to compress the discussion piece and we tend to take more time building something. So it's kind of, different and you have to adjust, the expectations about, how fast you can reasonably get a decision versus how fast you can reasonably build something. Like once they commit, oh my God. I've never seen people work so hard and work so diligently and deliver. And I would say that, build teams in China are as good as anybody in the world. I mean,
nice.
they're pretty committed. And they learn very quickly, very quickly. I mean, even if, we invent a technology, they can absorb it and put it into their repertoire in a matter of weeks. I mean, they're really adept at that. Um, and we had a really successful project, and we ended up building it 5 times. So we had to build it in China, we had to build it in Japan, then we built one for North America, which was Canada, United States, and Mexico. And then we kind of built it again, scaled down for Latin America. And so we had the LATAM countries, the South Cone, in another instance, in Europe and, United Kingdom. And the reason why United Kingdom was different from Europe was because of our business and how we were
Ah,
running IT. So IT had split the United Kingdom off from EMEA, or Europe, Middle East, and Asia.
Right.
And there was a certain level of antithesis there because well, UK obviously was based in London, and EMEA was based in Paris. Say no more. So the notion of somebody in the UK telling the French how they were going to run anything was never going to work.
Right. Right.
So, there was, an IT lead for EMEA that sat in Paris, and an IT lead for United Kingdom that sat in London, and never the twain shall meet. So, we had that dynamic. So working in that environment taught you an awful lot about diplomacy. And it taught you an awful lot about um, what makes good leadership. Like I learned good leadership for me as a
Hmm.
practitioner was about building trust and networks based off of trust. Like my brand was, if you asked Sherwin for something, Sherwin would make sure you got what you needed. Sherwin was the guy that you could trust to give you what you needed. And reciprocally, if I needed something from the security guys, or if I needed something from the infrastructure guys, or if I needed something from, you know, app dev team, because I had built this internal network of trust, I got stuff done. Like I made it happen. And that really taught me a lot about leadership. It's not about being in charge or,
Right.
moving people around the board. It's about enabling stuff to happen. And if you look at leadership through the lens of how do I enable an outcome? How do I enable my people
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
the best people they can? How do I remove the obstacles from the team, or remove the obstacles from the company or the brand or whatever? That for me was my leadership learning. So I've kind of, walked you through the progression of my career,
Hmm. Hmm.
and the through the lens of, what I learned about being a leader at each step. And I think ultimately the big takeaway for me is good leadership is about creating great teams and allowing people to be their best selves. Um, it's not about telling people how to do their job, because you should have figured that out when you hired them, or you should have done what was necessary to train them or give them the skills that they needed to get it done. It was about letting them know that you believed in them,
Hmm.
and letting them know that you had their back, and letting them know that it was okay to fail. And like somebody once said to me, my one of my bosses once said to me, your job is to be the shock absorber. You take the hit. Something bad happens, step up and you take the hit. Don't don't let it trickle down to the team. Don't say this one didn't do this and that one didn't do that, or we didn't. What you take the hit. That's what a leader does. And in so doing, you kind of insulate the team from those, torturous moments of why didn't you do X, Y, and Z, and allow them to continue to focus on the job at hand. And for me, that was like my big learning about how to be an IT leader. Um, and the other thing about leadership I learned along the way, honestly, is accepting the fact that sometimes people are not in the right role. And
Mm, yeah. Yeah.
you gotta, be prepared to deal with those scenarios. I think that I think that the reality is, for the most part, most people are in the right rules, but there are situations where it's either a situational or it's a skills, or it's an attitude, and you have to deal with it because honestly, there is a contagion, right? If people aren't pulling their weight, it affects those around them. So, you got to be mindful of that. And I think the other thing I've learned along the way is, your best performer, if that individual is a toxic individual, you're better off without that person because it really has a negative effect on the team overall.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
spirits get crushed, people get disillusioned, petty politics pervades, and it's never a good situation. So, I mean, we talked a lot about, being a leader through the lens of doing. I think that also is important. The the leaders that are engaged, the leaders that know the details, that take the time to listen to the problems and understand, the underlying causes for problems, delays, challenges, I think are the ones that are the most supportive of their team at the end of the
Hmm.
day. Because if you're just a technocrat, if you're just pushing paper or just saying, are you on time or you on budget, people just don't feel like they've got the air cover that they need. They don't feel like you're interested, and
Right,
they don't
right.
feel like they're being supported. So I think you have to take the time to really understand what's going on, ask the questions, be supportive. You don't always have to have the answers. I think sometimes the questions are more important than the answers
Right.
because
Yeah,
the questions show that you care and you're interested.
yeah, yeah.
We don't always have to have all the answers. So, I mean, for me, those are all the big things I've learned.
Very cool. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I always had the perspective that I I should be the last one to give an answer because I really I want the teams to build their self-confidence and their trusting of themselves and not to look to me to have the answers because I'm limited. Like I every human is limited, and I want to be able to go, hey, look, here's the problem we're trying to solve. Here's the business situation. Here's the customer needs. Go. What do you think? Right? There's no bad answer to those questions, um, and I only really want to be because my hypothesis is that whatever idea I think of for how to solve a problem, someone else in the team is going to think of it if it's a decent solution, right? And maybe my idea is not that good, and three people are going to have better ideas than I did, and I don't want them to have the friction of, oh wait, Bill said it, he's the boss, we're going to stop thinking about solving the problem, right? And so I'm like really focused on getting them to go, oh yeah, we could, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, right? And then talk about each one of those until they all agree what the best thing is. And 99 out of 100 times that works better. They trust, right? And they have ownership now, right? And I always find that ownership is such a valuable. If they have ownership, then they're engaged, and I always want engaged teams. I want them to be really good. I love your thing, by the way, about shock absorber. Um, I I've always done, and I've taught others that your job as lead is you take the arrows and your people get all the accolades, right? Because if something goes wrong, it's because you didn't think about it, because you're the team lead. It's your responsibility to be able to predict those problems. You're not going to be perfect. That's the game, right? And when it goes bad, say, okay, sorry, I didn't think about that. Let's see how do we solve this problem, and ask the team for help. Like, I wasn't thinking about this. Something broke. What do we do? What do you guys think? And away we go. Yeah, I like that.
The thing that you just said that really resonates with me is getting people to take ownership.
Oh, yeah.
Because it also communicates trust.
Right.
I trust you that you're going to take ownership of this and you're going to do what needs to be done to get it done. And you're not going to look to me to program you to get it, to get it across the finish line. And I think that's so important because that's how you develop leaders.
Right. Right.
Like I don't want followers working for me. I want leaders working for me. And I want leaders that ultimately will pass me by. Like my high, looking back on my career, is not what I've achieved. It's the achievements of the people that have worked for me.
Right.
Jobs that they've gone on to, the roles that they've had, the things that they've created, because that all indirectly reflects the fact that I enabled them at some point in their career and I contributed to their success. So that's why
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and that's it's it's kind of like parenting. you know I want my kids to know more at their current age than I knew at that age, right? And
Yeah.
so how do I help make them wiser? you know and same thing with people on my teams. I want them to be more knowledgeable about how things work. It's like, what are the systems that allow me to operate that I can teach them so they can operate better?
Right.
And
Yeah. No, I love that.
yeah,
I really do.
and I'm a huge, I'm like, I think everything's a system. And one of these days I'm going to remember to make a shirt that says it's systems all the way down.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And because everything that I look at, I realize, oh, there's a system for that. you know you want to build a foundation for a house, there's a system for that,
Right.
right? You want to deploy a product on AWS, there's a system for that. There's a bunch of systems, right?
Right.
Pick which one you want to use depending on what the thing you're deploying. There's always systems, even when we don't understand it. And the funny thing about this is I really didn't see that until like 5 years ago.
Really?
Yeah. And I kept thinking that I was just kind of cowboy, you know, and it wasn't until there was something that I read that was talking about systems, and I'd read books on systems thinking before, but I thought they didn't apply to me. And then somehow I read something and I clicked, and I was like, oh, yeah, in this area, I use a system. I always have a system, right? And then I was like, oh, and then also in this area. And then I kind of started deconstructing my life basically and going like, oh, wait a minute, I have systems for everything, you
Right.
know? And that was kind of an interesting, like, awakening moment. Because then once I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I have a system for everything, that means that everything I do is teachable.
That's right.
And so then the challenge just becomes, okay, what's the framework for the system, and how do I look at a bunch of systems and see what's the commonality? It's kind of like everything you ever worked on has a database behind it, right? And so once you're like, oh yeah, there's always a database, they always have a data model. Okay, great. There's always some application layer on top of that that's got business logic. And then there's some display, right? It's the model view controller kind of
Hmm.
thing. All of a sudden applications become much, much easier, you know? Um, Early in my coding career, when I realized, oh, wait a minute, everything has a database behind it, I was like, oh, this makes life so much easier. Like in
Right.
my head,
Yeah.
all of a sudden that became the system. And now I look at everything as, okay, how's the system work? Um, how do I have the self-awareness and the optimization, and how do I teach my people, right? You know, um, and I have this hypothesis right now, operating hypothesis, that there's a framework that every system has. And I, so far, have not hit um, anything that it doesn't fit. And so what I think right now is every system, number one, has a set of beliefs or mental models, right? That you have to have, right? Um, the second thing is you've got a a, a stack of necessary or not emotional resilience skills that you have to use.
Hmm.
And depending on kind of what you're doing, in like swimming, right? When you start learning how to swim, it can be really scary because you don't know how to hold your breath in the water, right? And then you get comfortable holding your breath, and that's not scary anymore, and you don't have to have emotional resilience. But then you start learning how to swim, and you're not by the side of the pool anymore, and you have to have the courage to go in the deep part of the pool, right? Emotional resilience, all of a sudden you have to have those skills again. You keep progressing. um, then one day you go surfing, and there's a whole new set of problems, right? um, and it may be like, I have a system for making coffee in the morning. I don't need emotional resilience anymore because I've been doing that same process for 15 years. Except that when I go camping, I get nervous that I'm not going to be able to make my coffee.
Hmm.
So because the environment changes, or if I have to travel somewhere, I'm like, I'm not taking a French press with me, you know. So then it's like, okay, where am I going to find somebody that can make me a good cup of coffee in the morning? Because that's, I'm kind of hooked on good coffee in the morning. Um, and then understanding how to communicate it effectively, right, to other people is critical. You're talking about communication a minute ago. You've got to be able to communicate well, and that's a trust building thing, right? Um, and and
I know it's hokey, but like, what you're talking about, like I saw this acronym where they took fail and they turned it
mhm,
into first attempt in learning.
right,
And
totally,
I'm like, yeah, that's so elegant and so brilliant and so obvious. If
right,
you flip it around and say, how many times do you get it right the first time? Not a lot.
zero.
Yeah, I
In my,
mean, not a
yeah,
lot. You
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah,
I know it's tangential, but I remember the first time I ever fired a gun.
yeah,
I nearly dropped the gun and, pissed my pants all at the same time because between the noise and the flash and the kick, I was like so overwhelmed by
right, right,
sensations that I didn't even know how to process it. And of course, barely hit, the paper target. But eventually the noise doesn't bother you anymore.
Right.
You relax and you accept the fact that there's going to be, a kickback, and the flash is the flash, and it's coming, and you don't think about it anymore. You just know there is going to be one. And and then you start focusing on the target, and you're not about first you're thinking about what the gun's going to do, and you're not
Right.
thinking
Right.
about what you want the gun to do, which is hit the target. And
Yep.
eventually you
Yep.
get past the gun and you get to the target, and now you're focused on getting the gun and the target to come together, and it's a completely different sensation. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like you're in charge now,
Right. Right. Yeah.
And and it's every situation is like that. I mean, learning to drive, and learning
Yeah.
to swim, and I mean, lear- learning to hit a golf ball, like all the body motions and the physics that need to come together to hit a golf ball. I mean, it looks obvious when you watch a pro swing, but put a club in your hand and try and hit a drive, and it's just like, if you even connect with the ball, it's, nothing short of a miracle, let
Right.
alone the
Right.
ball goes in a straight line. And I think that it is about a couple of things at the same time. One, it's about letting go and accepting the fact that you aren't going to be perfect. You are going to fail, but failure is really a process.
Right. Right.
And learning how to do something is a process. And once you've achieved it, being able to teach it to somebody else is a process.
100%. Yes. Yes.
And learning how to connect with somebody at a level where you can break the pieces down into consumable chunks that people can absorb and
Right.
integrate is is a process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Learning how to teach is a process.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. I think that everything can be looked at, through the lens of a system. And I think that, we do that in every aspect of our lives. We just are not mentally necessarily aware of it or even ponder it,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
just do.
Yeah.
But
I spent
yeah,
I spent decades not thinking about systems and but unconsciously doing them over and over and over again.
sure, sure.
And until all of a sudden I had this kind of light bulb moment of, oh yeah, I'm doing, and now I tend to think of, okay, what's the system look like here, and and how can I go into a situation looking for my own recognition of the system, and 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 knowing full well that the first glance at the system I'm going to fail, right? um because there's nuance that I'm not going to understand. It's and your shooting example is perfect, because you when you start off, yeah, it's like, what's the most immediate sensation, and then you get used to it, and then it's, okay, what's the next level, and then, oh, now the target, keeping the rounds A on the paper, then B you're trying to, and then, oh, now you have to get farther away, you know and
Yeah,
like there's a whole set of, oh, you're going from handguns to rifles, and they all operate differently, right? And it's always this new learning,
yeah,
um but then I think also there's a place where you start to abstract and you understand, oh, wait a minute, this is a commonality across these kinds of, it's like driving a car, right? I don't know about you, but I've driven uh probably a few hundred different kinds of cars by now, different models,
oh yeah,
and so you give me the keys to a new car, I'm I'm not I'm not worried about. I'm like, I'll figure it out because I know it's got to have an accelerator and a brake and a steering wheel and turn signals, windshield wipers, a light switch, door locks. Like uh, there's a system there that's just automatic in the back of my head. You know.
Yeah,
Um,
the only exception to that rule is, when you get to the United Kingdom and they drive on the other
on
side,
the other side, right,
and
right, right.
and
Yeah,
and you're driving down the highway, and your wife is, "Hey, move over." No, you're drifting. You're drifting.
yeah, yeah. Years ago, a friend of mine had a right-hand drive Mini Cooper.
Oh yeah.
Um, the first versions, right? Manual transmission, and I could not remember to shift left-handed. I kept reaching over and I'd grab the the window winder when I wanted to shift gears, and it was it was automatic, and I'm like, okay, left, and plus then it's the shifting pattern feels backwards
Right. Right.
because you have to go from first on the outside to fourth on the inside. Um, it was just such a. Uh, I'm glad I only drove it twice because it was so awkward to me. I was like,
Oh my God. It's
yeah,
the thought of shifting with my left hand, it just, I tried it once and I didn't even get off the lot.
oh yeah, I had to get the car moved around, so yeah, it was pretty
I,
funny.
I, I went back in. I said, you know what? I surrender. I need an automatic. But it is interesting though that experience is is intriguing when you think about it, because the range of things you're willing to tackle with experience, I believe, is exponentially greater
Right,
than what you would otherwise be willing to try at a much earlier stage in your life and development. Like I feel
100%.
today, physically, I'm obviously not a 20-year-old, man, but because of the range of things that I've done over the course of my life,
Hmm.
I feel pretty confident that, I could pick up another skill,
Oh yeah, of course.
or I could,
Yep.
do something a different way, or, like I
Right.
think some of it is learning to trust yourself. Some of it is
Hmm.
the notion of everything is a system. Now, how do I break it down into the pieces and parts that I can,
Exactly.
know, get it
Yeah.
through my thick skull? Um, and then some of it is just confidence building. Like, if I can if I can implement a warehouse system, then I could probably implement the planning system. And if I can implement
Right.
the planning system, I could probably implement a financial system, and on and on and on,
Right.
because
Right.
there's patterns there, there's
Oh,
processes there, and
yes.
patterns carry over. And so once you've kind of done one thing, you can do another thing. And I think that that actually is how people's IT careers evolve, right? Because, if you can be an analyst, you could probably be a good programmer. And if you could, be a good programmer, you could be a good tech lead. And if you could be a good tech lead, chances are you could probably be an executive. And, once you learn managerial skills, I hate to say it, but, you can take an IT executive and turn him into a COO in a pinch. And, I mean, those skills kind of, they start to broaden and they start to become more transferable, and your comfort level increases. I just wish to heck there was a way to take that and imbue it in people earlier in their career, because imagine what we'd all achieve over the course of a career if we could accelerate
Right.
that, process, that system that we all have to go through to get to the point where we're prepared to tackle bigger and bigger challenges.
So that was so that's part of the reason that 40% better exists is to do exactly that. because with, I've been running software teams here in the Silicon Valley for 25 years.
Hmm.
And the thing that kept happening was they kept doing things people said were impossible, like over and over and over again. Right.
Right.
And I started having executives ask me, like, what are you doing? Like, I don't know how to do whatever it is you're doing. Right. And so my partner actually gave me the language to figure it out. She's a mental health clinician, and she wanted to know what I was doing. And so she interviewed me and said, "Oh, I see what you're doing. Now I understand what you're doing and why it's different from other people." And I said, "Okay, what am I doing?" And she said, "The first thing is you have a very different set of mental models. And so you see possibilities and you look at the world differently than other people do. And so you do things that they just won't do. And that helps your teams operate better." The second
Hmm.
thing is I use emotional resilience skills for performance. And this is a stack of um, very clinically researched skills. I learned them organically doing sports when I was a teenager, um, and abstracted that into my business life. Um, and and she's like, that actually matters, because when my peers got emotionally uncomfortable and wouldn't do things to take care of the team, I would go take care of the team. Right.
Hmm.
And the third thing was I started breaking down communication so that I could get executives to say yes to my requests. And again, systems, right? I built a system to do that. And I also built a system for getting over social anxiety, because I used to have really bad social anxiety.
Interesting.
And um, when I first started leading a team, which was a complete surprise promotion for me, um, one of my first oh my God kind of moments was, I have social anxiety. I'm a shy introvert. How the hell am I going to lead,
Hmm.
like do all the stuff that's required, right? And so that turned into hunting around for and talking with friends about it. Um, and then I built out a system which was um, a bunch of tiny steps. I'm a very, very much an incrementalist.
Hmm.
And I've taught hundreds of people that system now, and everybody that's done it, it worked. Like,
Hmm.
it's because having social anxiety is a learning, it's a mental models, it is a skills, and it's a practice problem. It's not biological. It's like learning how to swim, right?
Right.
You can teach anybody how to swim. They just need to be willing to go do it, right? And actually do the exercise, not just intellectually hear about it. Um, so communication is really critical, and my peers didn't get good at that. Like they just never wrapped their heads around it. The fourth part is understanding power dynamics. And one of my founders, I've done a bunch of startups. Um, One of the founders at a company that I was at made a comment to me that as a team lead, I had more power in the company than he did, even though he wrote the checks. And I
Hmm.
said, wait, what? And he said, look, I want better performing teams. You are with your team all day, every day. You can impact performance more than I can. I don't have the leverage, right? He said, you have the leverage with the software teams to make them operate better. This guy has the leverage with the sales team to make them operate better. This woman runs marketing. She has the leverage with them to make them operate better, right? And my job as the founder is to help each of you be as effective as possible with getting your teams to operate better. And I was like, oh, that's a whole different mental model. And so as time went on, what that turned into was I would talk to anybody in the company about anything, right? Um, my peers wouldn't do that. Back to emotional resilience, they were afraid to go have those conversations. Um, and so, I've gone and talked to executives and gotten funding for everything that my team needed, which builds trust, right? That exactly what you're talking about. Um, and I've gotten company policies changed, um, gotten new lines of business created for companies, all because I was willing to go talk to the executives because I saw the power dynamics very differently. And then I just make everything habits, right? And because it's all habits, I don't have to have much discipline. You have to have discipline to create the habit, but then once you get it going, then you know you,
Right.
it's just rinse and repeat. And so at our whole thing with 40PB is to teach people that as early as possible, because once you can get your team leads to start doing that consistently, um, your performance goes up ridiculously high level, because you're getting, number one, you got trust. Number two, you have psychological safety. Number three, you're finding people's intrinsic motivation, ownership, right? And they work better, smarter, harder. And like if someone is already a team lead and you can teach them that, then their teams operate better. And if they're an individual contributor and they're thinking about maybe being a team lead someday, once they learn this, they can start practicing it and either A, decide, yeah, this is a direction I want to go, or B, I don't want to manage people. And then we don't make the mistake of promoting them, because they can be vocal and say, hey, like, I appreciate all this training, but I don't want to lead people. I've been experimenting on my own and I don't want to do it. And then we go, okay, what's the career path you want to follow, right? Um,
That's a really interesting line of thought. So typically, the organizational structure is set up that growth is defined by the number of people you manage,
mm-hmm.
right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
you don't manage anybody, then you're kind of down the ladder. And, you manage 50 people and you're high up the ladder.
right, right,
And then in IT, you get, there's disciplines in IT where you may not necessarily need to manage a lot of people to, you know, have a critical role in the organization.
right.
And I don't think anybody's really figured that out. Like we kicked it around at Estee Lauder as an example,
Mm-hmm.
and they came up with, this, well, maybe we'll have a dual career track where, there'll be another track for people that, typically don't manage a lot of people, like say three, four people tops, and they're more, you know, individual contributor type resources,
Sure.
almost
Yep,
like
yep.
internal consultants or experts in particular disciplines that don't need to manage a large team to be integral and effective in their role.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But gosh darn it, it went against the grain of the organizational structure because it's like, well, finance people, manage
Sure.
the
Yeah, yep,
ladder,
yep, yep,
and the
yeah.
marketing people manage the ladder, and the salespeople manage the ladder, and everybody's, somewhere on the ladder. And now you're talking about making somebody, a general without an army.
Yeah, and so
And they're like, how does that work?
yeah, it's maybe tech is different from the other places because I've been at companies and I've talked to people at companies that have um, they have non-managerial tracks.
Hmm.
And so what's happening is you start off and you're a junior software engineer, right? And then you get to a certain level, and you know you're whatever skill level, right? It's fairly low, right? And then you move up and you know more stuff, and now you're a regular software engineer. And then and as you're moving up the ladder, you're contributing deeper and deeper into design. And sooner or later, at some level, you're an architect who's defining the the way that we're going to design a platform out,
Yeah.
right? And that gets to be rarefied atmosphere. Like the last team that I ran, um, we we had a stack of internal tools for a social media company that were completely maxed out from a technology perspective, and both user interface speed and the servers fully maxed out. It was at that point in time, it was like 10-year-old technology that was running.
Mm.
And so they said, look, you need to build a whole new system from nothing. Do whatever you want to. Like, we don't care, right? You've got a blank whiteboard, go to town, but you got to move to the cloud, because we still had servers on premises, or in a cage. And we had 3 people on our team who knew enough as individual contributors to design a whole new system from scratch. And that was awesome, because they had ownership, right? You know, they were really happy to have that exciting of a project to do. And they didn't want to manage people. Like, that was, like, I was doing one-on-ones with them, asking them consistently, like, where do you want to go with your career? None of them wanted to manage. They all wanted, I want deeper tech understanding so I can be better at doing this particular thing, right? And that
I mean,
worked.
yeah, managing people is tough. It's
It's a different skill
really,
set.
it's
Yeah.
a different skill set, and I believe it's much more emotionally demanding
Oh,
than,
yes.
I mean, because you're constantly challenged to walk the line between empathy
Mm-hmm.
and the party line.
Right.
Because on the
Right.
one hand, there's situations where empathy says, yeah, that guy has a point, but he's disrupting, the ecosystem. And, how do I tread here? And then there's times where, you want to give somebody latitude and they don't handle it well.
Right. Right.
And then you got to reel them in, and and that's not an easy thing to do either. And you've got everything on the continuum. You have people's health issues, you have people's emotional issues, you have people's social dynamic issues. I like this one, I don't like that one, I won't work with this one, I'll work with that one.
Right.
You've got, I mean, just personality types. And when you're not a manager, it's just like the guy next to you, like whatever. But when you're managing people, you have to figure out a way to harness all of that,
Mm-hmm.
get everybody going in the same direction to achieve the goals that you need to achieve as the leader of that operating function.
Right. Right.
And that's not an easy thing to do. There are times when the work itself is complicated, and the social dynamic is complicated, and sometimes even the political dynamic is complicated, and you're trying to balance all of this stuff out, and it's just like, wow, this is tough.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
nobody told me that this is not a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I mean, that's part of the reason we built this system, right? Is to be able to break that down.
Yeah.
And frankly, when I started, like, I was looking for a system when I started, 25 years ago. And
Mm.
I couldn't find one, so I built my own.
Mhm.
Luckily, I had some good um, I had some good experiences and some good mentors when I was younger, and so I leveraged those, and then I just kept refining things, and and you know, experimenting on my people to try and figure out how do we optimize this, how do we get it to work better, um, how do I consistently have them A, be happy, B, higher performing, um, and if I can hit those two things, then we're doing good, and
Right.
so getting them to trust me, and feel psychologically safe was huge. Getting them to be intrinsically motivated was huge. And I find that when I got those things done, and I will freely admit that there were multiple times when I went to the execs and said, I want my team to be better performing. For me to be able to, and you want my team to be better performing, right? Like, if you don't, tell me now, you know. But I would say, here's what I need, and this means we're gonna have to make these changes. And this is why I see this as being an improvement. I want to experiment for the next 3 months. Every executive said yes. I was a little more eloquent than that when I talked with them usually.
Sure.
And every time it worked. And I think one of the pieces that was really important was, because my people trusted me and I appealed to their intrinsic motivation, I got better results, right? And the hard part was I had to have the nerve to go talk to the execs or HR, whoever it was. But after I'd done that like 5 or 6 times, maybe 10,
Hmm.
it got to be back to systems. I knew what the system was to get them to say yes. And for me to go in with a super high level degree of confidence that they would do it, that they would say, oh, of course, yeah, no problem. And I've had people switch their responsibilities around, switch teams. Um, I've found, we had one guy that he was on a different team, and my team, I had inherited a team that was horribly performing, and all of a sudden, over the course of 6 months, they became the best performing team in the company by a huge margin in terms of code throughput. And the leader of this other team one day pinged me and said, hey, can we talk for a while? And I'm like, yeah, what do you want to know? And he goes, can I give you one of my people? Because he's just not performing. And I'm like, okay, sure. Let me, I'll take him. And, by the way, let me give you one of mine. We'll trade, and we'll say it's for cross training. Right. And so, okay, cool. We took this guy. He immediately started giving us much better thinking about problem solving than what we had. He immediately became a great contributor around how to solve problems. And on the other team, he just hadn't had that opportunity. Right. We kept him. I was like, you can't have him back. Right. Like, I don't know why he didn't perform well in your world, but in my world, he's amazing. And the whole rest of the team thought it too. It wasn't just like me making, lateral decision. So I got hooked into that guy's intrinsic motivation. Um, everybody's pulling in the same directions, and I'm a very happy camper, right? And so are my execs, for that matter, right? And so that's what we teach people how to do. And when you start off as early as possible, it automates. You get used to it. So
I mean, it's funny that you give me that example because I was in a situation where it's a very weird situation. We was part of a startup and they decided to use the venture people decided to use us as a vehicle to acquire and roll up more established tech companies.
Hmm.
So, they did this reverse triangular merger, one of these,
Okay.
Silicon Valley engineering deals. And, we had, $70 million of net operating losses. And, they bought a company that actually made money. And
Mm,
they, slammed these two cultures together that couldn't be more different because one was East Coast, one was West Coast, one was Silicon Valley startup, and, the other was a very established, I would say very conservative, software company. And I ended up in charge of a bunch of people that I had never met before and didn't know much about. And um, somebody said, "Hey, we have this person that, we'd like to give you. She's kind of a pain in the butt. She's hard to manage, but she gets her work done." And I said, "Okay," and she wasn't a pain in the butt. She was just honest. And
mm,
she was
yep.
very bright, and she was very candid, and she was very straight ahead and exceptionally hardworking, which put a lot of people off because she was so hardworking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I got her and I realized, what made her tick, and I put her in a situation where she had, the work that she needed to
Right.
feel fulfilled, and she could focus on the work and not, create social disruption. Then she was a star. And
Right.
interestingly enough, to this day, and it's nearly 20 years later, she's an independent consultant, and I still hire her from time to time because I know that if I bring her in, she'll get more done in 3 months than five people will in 12. So,
Yeah.
and I have to be willing, to listen to, her tell me the hard truth sometimes that I don't want to hear. But that's just the nature of who she is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
No, it's
yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, it's listen, it sounds like we've had, really great opportunities and careers. And
oh
uh,
yeah.
I think we started the conversation by talking about being grateful. And I think that
Yep.
is probably the one thing that I can take away from my career, and that I am so grateful that I've had the career that I've had, that I've had the
Hmm.
opportunities that I've had the leaders that I've had, and more importantly, that I've had the people that I've managed, that I've had that opportunity to manage because they made me what I am today.
Perfect. I think that is an awesome note to end on because I'm looking at the clock and going, "Oh my
Yeah,
God,
yeah,
I've had you
we
for
did run
90
over.
minutes." And yeah,
Yeah,
and I
been
feel kind of
great.
guilty. No,
Yeah,
but this was awesome. I really appreciate your insights. They were very good, especially because you've had such a different career path than I have.
right.
Um, and that's kind of the whole reason again why we're doing this, right? Is to get
Sure.
um, all these different stories out there for people to be able to go, oh, that's what's possible.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
this has been cool. Thank you, Sherwin.
Thank you very
I
much, Bill. I
appreciate it.
really appreciate the opportunity.
Yep. Thank you. I'll talk
All
to you soon.
right. Stay
Thanks.
well.
Okay, you
Bye-bye.
too. Bye bye.